The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Wares, editor of the LA Times Book Club. This past month, we've all been reading Why We Swim, which provides such a welcome break during the pandemic. Part memoir and part travelogue, Bonnie Tsui's new book takes us from the California coast to Iceland swim culture to the Hawaii of the South China Sea. The book is about our relationship with water. And some of the most exciting passages are the stories of extreme swimmers. In this book, we meet an Icelandic fisherman who became a national hero after his boat capsized and he survived 6 hours swimming in 41-degree water. There's also Kim Chambers, the Bay Area swimmer who completed the Ocean's 7 Challenge. That's 7 of the world's most grueling channel swims. We meet up with Olympic champions like Dara Torres, the Los Angeles native who competed in 5 Olympics and came out of retirement to win 2 final medals at age 41. There's also an appearance by Diana Nyad, who at 64 became the first person to complete a swim from Cuba to Key West, and Diana did it without a shark cage. Why We Swim also features Lynne Cox, the legendary Southern California athlete whose pioneering achievements include crossing the Bering Strait. She swam from Alaska to the Soviet Union in 1987. Lynne, the author of Swimming to Antarctica and many other books, will be joining us this evening. But first, let's talk with Bonnie about why we swim. She's a journalist, surfer, and lifelong swimmer who often writes for the California Sunday Magazine and the New York Times. Tonight, Bonnie will be in conversation with my colleague, James Rainey. He's also a master swimmer. Please join me in welcoming Bonnie and Jim to the virtual LA Times Book Club stage. Hi, guys. Thanks for being here.
Hey.
Hi,
Hey.
Anna. Hi, Jim.
Good to see you.
So these are crazy times, to say the least. And I thought we might start off our talk tonight. I wanted to ask you, how are you faring during the pandemic, Bonnie? And where are you swimming these days?
I feel like it's like this, right? It's a wave. It's a sine curve. It's everything up and down. But today is a high because I get to be with all of you. It's such an honor to be selected for the July, LA Times Book Club pick, and I'm just so honored and so happy to be here with you tonight. Another high today was that I got to swim for the second time in 5 months in a 25-yard pool, which felt so long. It felt like forever, the walls, but it felt so good. And I've been swimming mostly in the San Francisco Bay, but it is a real treat as pools are slowly reopening around here in Northern California, that I got a coveted berth, in a reserved lane. And Jim, I understand you have more options than I do, so I'm a little jealous.
Yeah, Jim, tell us about where have you been swimming?
I'm a regular at Rose Bowl, at right next to the Rose Bowl, 2 beautiful 50-meter pools. They were closed for months. They just reopened, so I'm swimming with my pals from Rose Bowl Aquatics, some of whom I'm sure are watching tonight. And then, there's so many beach options here. I swim at Tower 26 in Santa Monica. I swim at Manhattan Beach. And just recently, I've been swimming at Rat Beach, which is right at the little piece of Torrance that hits the ocean. Locals will know about. You can swim right up to the beautiful kelp beds of Palos Verdes, which is really cool. And it's been a lifesaver, I know, for me, I'm sure for Bonnie too, to be able to keep going to the water with all the craziness that all of us are living through.
Absolutely.
So this evening, before we get started in our conversation, I wanted to invite our readers. If you have questions for our guests this evening, please leave your questions at the LA Times Facebook page. We'll have a brief Q&A after our book talk, and you can ask our guests anything that's on your mind. Right now, I think I'd like to toast our guests. Cheers to you both.
Yay!
What's a book club without a cocktail? And I'd like to turn the conversation over to Jim, and I'll be joining you a little later.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna. This is really fun for me. I cover things normally like government, and lately I've been writing about police use of force and stuff that's really pretty heavy, and of course, writing about COVID. So to be here with a fellow swimmer, the only thing that's odd about this meeting Bonnie this way is usually I meet other swimmers and Bonnie will totally appreciate this. And you're on a pool deck or you're in the water, you have your cap on, you have your goggles on. And normally, right, we see each other and we're kind of freaked out when we actually see each other dry. So we're kind of doing this backwards. Usually swimmers.
We are. We absolutely are. I would
Yeah,
normally not recognize you with clothes on. That's the thing.
Exactly. And yeah, it sounds kind of racy, but that's just a swimmer thing. When you see people with clothes on, you go, wow, okay, you have hair. And but anyway, I want to get to why we swim. For people who swim, I think it feels like it would be so hard to capture kind of the joy and the essence of being in the element of water, but you did it so amazingly in your book. I could pick almost any chapter, any page to zero in on, but one that really struck me and that really just resonated with me was when you wrote about what you call the Baghdad Swim Club. And that was really significant to me because I had gone and covered the war in Iraq in 2006 and spent a month in Baghdad. And I have to say, one of the most stressful months of my entire life because of what was going on there. It was kind of a height of the sectarian violence. But at the place we stayed, the Hamra Hotel, they had a beautiful pool, approximately 25-yard pool, and it was such a lifesaver. So when I saw that you somehow incongruously, people wouldn't think Baghdad swimming, but tell us a little bit about how you learned about this Baghdad Swim Club and really what that was and why it was such a place of joy for so many people in a very, very troubled part of the world.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say, I mean, we've talked about this before a little bit, but I love that we're able to talk about this. That I'm able to talk to you as someone who has been swimming in a pool in Baghdad during a time of war. I mean, you are definitely the only person who I've spoken to, other than the folks in the book who were part of this swim club that who had this experience. So I just love that you had, personal um, a really personal understanding of what it was like to find a little bit of escape, a little window of normalcy in what is really an extraordinary time and place. And of course, in a time of war, that having that is such a valuable thing. So
Yeah.
In this story, or how I kind of stumbled upon the story, is that the person who started the swim club wrote to me. So he was a pen pal of mine, and actually is still a pretty dedicated pen pal, and a swimming one, Jay Taylor, and he's the coach. And so I'll back up and say that in 2008, he went to Baghdad as a part of the Foreign Service, and he was tasked with restarting the Fulbright program in Iraq. And so he went there, and at the time, the Green Zone was situated in Saddam Hussein's Republican palace. And so, of the many, many lavish homes and palaces that Saddam Hussein had, this one was the one he used to entertain visiting heads of state, and had a very lavish outdoor pool with diving boards and fountains and outdoor
Right.
chandeliers, and that
Right.
everybody who was in the Green Zone was allowed to swim in this pool. And he started to swim in it, and then little by little, all of these people, translators, UN peacekeepers, soldiers, locals who were assisting on the ground, they also started to ask him, hey, can you, teach me some pointers here? And before long, he had a swim team, a club of, a roster over the 2 years he was there of 250 people, sort of rotating through. And it was this amazing. What I love about this community is that it sprang in this extraordinary, very unexpected place, and it
Hmm.
was people from all over the world, Mexico, Lebanon, Madagascar, the U.S., and that they all had reasons why they hadn't yet learned to swim or weren't comfortable in the water, and he became this sort of mentor, water mentor, I guess, to them,
Yeah.
and they came together, and then it was a very special time that they had together, and then after their terms were over there, and then they kind of atomized back around the globe, but that this special moment, this like very um, this community that was so extraordinary in this extraordinary place in this extraordinary time had you know many radiating effects after that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so beautiful to think of it. And I think all of us who you swim with a master's team, I think, or at a regular pool. And it's amazing the community you develop between everyone from people who are maybe Olympic level to people who are just learning to swim.
Right, it's a
Um,
bond that's really special.
yeah, yeah. And it's funny, if you go to swim at the same places, of course, that community is so important. Um, and some of those folks are still staying connected to Jay, aren't they? Years later, even after they've all left Iraq.
Yeah, I think what was so special to hear from all of these people was not necessarily, of course, it was the experience of being there and swimming there and finding again like this bit of normalcy that kept them feeling human. I think oftentimes in war you just start to feel like you are, on autopilot. You're not really accessing your
Yeah.
emotions because it's a very hard time and place to be. And I often think about a friend's mom who was a combat nurse in Vietnam, and she always said, one of the things that kept her going was that how everybody clung to these rituals of having dinner together, sharing baby
Mm.
pictures,
Yeah.
going for swims. That was what made them
Hmm.
remember who they were. And then also, of course, in a time of war, that in the pool, in such a hierarchical place that's so
Yeah.
regimented, that you could find a freedom in the water and an egalitarian sense of community.
Yeah. And you had everybody in there from U.S. servicemen to translators to shopkeepers, and I just love that about swimming. I love that about your portrait of the club. The thing that's interesting about that being so egalitarian and so such a mix of people is that we still here in this country, and you wrote a bit about this too. Swimming still can be an elite sport and a sport that's sort of not for the masses. It's sometimes just for people of privilege. Pools are obviously still more prevalent in more well-to-do neighborhoods. I wondered, like, what did you learn about that when you were researching the book? How difficult is it still for some people to find access to swimming?
Well, what I really found that was became so clear over the course of my research is that in this country the sport of swimming is so white, from the
Hmm.
beginning, and that is so tied to America's uh, legacy of segregation, and that has a racial legacy in almost every facet of life. And I think more Americans are becoming more aware of those, just how insidious and really like overpowering those effects are. And so swimming is no exception. And I think that, of course, it traces back very specifically to, in this country, how public pools evolved from places that were more like public baths, public health places that where race was not an issue, and it was more about, a place where the working class could go, and then became a race issue when those public pools became recreational spaces. And that's where the issue of race came in. And then, um, Blacks especially were barred from entry, um, and other people of color as well. But I think it really has a very insidious legacy when it comes to African Americans
Yeah.
and swimming ability, and this sort of educational gap in swimming ability access, and that not only that, but that it then left an imprint that was uh, uh, one that was full of stereotypes. So culturally, there are plenty of stereotypes where, that Black people can't swim, and where that comes from is this legacy of segregation and racism. And
Right.
one of the organizations that I've been speaking with lately is one called Black Kids Swim, and one of the
Mm-hmm.
founders told me that when her daughter was starting out to be a competitive swimmer, started Googling like Black Kids Swim, and all of these really terrible stereotypes would come up. Like that was what surfaced in the searches, and she made it a mission.
Yeah.
Roseman said, we have to change this. And so Black Kids Swim
Yeah.
was founded as a way to promote and support and expand the participation of Black competitive swimmers. Because
Right.
once you get past, if you make it past the hurdles of access and learning how to swim and joining a team, you still hit so many more obstacles,
Right.
cultural ones that feel like you can't overcome them, and where are your role models? And so they work really hard to change that to positive ones.
Nice. That's good to hear. Yeah, I have been really educated myself. I grew up around here in California and went to Santa Monica High School, but only because of the situation with George Floyd did I just recently learn about the segregated beach we had right there in Santa Monica, which was derisively known as the Inkwell, which was the one beach where, Black folks were welcome to swim. And
Right.
there's both really negative and really kind of positive associations with that because a number of Black people began to, really adopt that as a point of pride that that was their beach. And there's a really famous swimmer, surfer, Nick Gabaldon, who swam there and was surfed there and kind of owned it. Instead of it being like you're segregated there, he kind of became the king of that beach, which was a really
Right.
cool story.
I wanted to mention a really great story on that a note of Skylar Smith is a Howard University graduate of 2020. She was a 3-year captain of the swim team, and Howard is the only historical Black college in America that has a swim team, and she just started training open water at the Inkwell
Mm,
for this swim that they do in Senegal every year in October. That is from Dakar to this island called Gorée Island, and it's to honor and remember those Africans who escaped slavery to swim back. It was like Gorée Island, from what I understand, is the place where slaves or people were held to be shipped in the transatlantic slave trade. And so
wow.
this the swim is like, I think it's like 3.5 miles or something like that, and it's it is very well. It's like the 32nd year that it's going to be happening this fall, and so.
Wow.
Uh, Skylar has been training for that, and she said training in the Inkwell, like she didn't know about. She grew up in LA, she like swims, she swims there
Right.
now. But she didn't know anything about it, and she said like connecting with this history is just, it's really meaningful because it's not a place where African Americans have participated in this swim, and it like, but in Senegal, it's like this, more than 3 decade, and then
Wow.
of course many more years in that tradition of like swimming as escape, as freedom, and all of these positive associations. And so, I think trying to bridge the gap between our understanding of like what swimming can be for different and all people, right? So like the stories and the traditions. Uh, how we understand them in America is very different from how we understand them in the rest of the world. And so part of my
Yeah.
goal with writing this book was to tell stories from around the world that kind of illustrated the shift in perspective that you have when
Yeah.
you go elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so accomplished that. And just recently they had a swim at the Inkwell dedicated to George Floyd. And, I think had around 100 people participate. So that was a really beautiful thing. And anyway, there's so many scenes, as I said, that I love in your book. Another one is Alcatraz, because Alcatraz is such an iconic spot, both for someone who's in the Bay Area, I went to school at Berkeley, and where I know you live now. And so the idea of swimming from Alcatraz, because we all know the history, but tell us a little bit about how you became. A lot of people think of that, especially non-swimmers, and they're like, "Oh my God, no one survived that we know of. No one survived that swim who was a prisoner on Alcatraz." So why Alcatraz? And tell me about how you came to do that swim. And yeah,
First of all, I love that as we drive across the Bay Bridge, sometimes that I can say to my sons, "Hey, you see Alcatraz over there? Mama swam from Alcatraz to San Francisco." It's such a point of pride for me that I did that. Well,
yeah,
because I'm not. I want to be clear and say that I'm not a huge open water swimmer. Open water swimming is not something that I did my whole life or anything like that. I started
right,
out, as many of us do as swimmers, swim lessons, joined the swim team, became a lifeguard, and then really started over my 20s after college to explore open water swimming, and then started surfing, and then living here in the Bay Area, I had many friends who swam with the Dolphin Club and the South End Rowing Club, and they said, "Hey, you should check out this swim one day and swim from Alcatraz." And of course, it's so iconic. I mean, there's such a mythology. There's with the currents and the cold water, and so I started training with a friend at Aquatic Park, which is sort of where the Dolphin Club and South End Rowing Club are situated on the north side of San Francisco, and it's like right near the Golden Gate Bridge, and you have this amazing view of Alcatraz, and you get a
yeah,
sense of how um, powerful those currents are when you kind of head out from this protected cove, and depending on when the tide, what's happening with the tide, you can see yourself getting ripped out to sea, or
yeah,
like gone, blown in with the container ships into like the port of Oakland. It's
yeah,
really
yeah.
nuts.
It goes crazy. Yeah, I also once did the Alcatraz swim, and they tell you the day I was there, it was a tide flowing out of the bay, and they said very much just it doesn't look right, but just aim straight towards the Bay Bridge, and the current is going to whip you around, and before you know it, you'll be headed actually into Aquatic Park, which for people, if you don't recognize, Aquatic Park is kind of just below Ghirardelli Square and kind of at the far end of Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. So yeah, fantastic image. And when it was a federal prison, there was no known swimmer to ever, of course, escape from Alcatraz. There were some remnants that they found on shore of the brothers, right? Who
Right, the
escaped from
Anglin brothers.
Alcatraz.
They found like parts of the raft that they had made, and
Right,
some, uh,
right.
and then and then there was a swimmer who had, or a prisoner who had tried to escape and then ended up washed up like near the Presidio, so
Yeah,
didn't make it
I-
out, didn't
yeah,
escape.
uh,
Suffering from hypothermia, but it's just really such a rich history that I wanted to. It's fun to be a part of that. It's fun to, of course,
yeah,
now when you swim, you've got a nice guideboat to take you and tell you when to
right,
swim and which point, and
right.
but you still feel like it's such a shock when you jump in the water. It's so cold, and
Yeah, yeah. It can freeze you so you get ice cream headache even.
right, yes.
Cold.
Oh, and I remember jumping in at Alcatraz and just thinking like, and then just
Yeah,
seeing that under that water level perspective of the Golden Gate Bridge was just incredible. And I think
yeah,
about that all the time. I did that swim once, and I think
yeah.
about it all the time, and it
Yeah,
can't.
me too. Yeah, it's really awe-inspiring. We got to talk about your new Icelandic buddy, whose name I'm probably going to butcher, but it's Good Looker, right?
Good person.
Yeah.
I want to
So
say
this is,
something about the photo that we
yeah,
have, and if we
yeah.
can pull, I don't know if we can pull. Yeah. So
There he is.
this photo is great because okay, so he's very notoriously press shy. This photo is great because he when you lovely folks at the book club asked me, do you have any photos of him? And I, of course, respecting his privacy, said I have to ask him first. And he said, "Oh, you can use this one. I love this one because no one's gonna come looking for me if they see it."
Oh my God. He is so fierce looking. Um, yeah, so amazing guy, and he has obviously an incredible spirit. But I guess most of our folks listening here know the basic story. But his swim in the 41-degree water, I think it was, around Iceland. Just give us a brief recap and why that swim has become really like a national. The anniversary of that swim has become like a national holiday almost in
Sure.
Iceland.
Well, so he's a fisherman, and in 1984 he was 20. He's early 20s. Was the ship's mate, and he was on a fishing vessel, off the coast of Iceland, and the boat capsized, and everyone was pitched into the sea. It was, like we said, 41 degrees, the water, and in that temperature water, most of us, 20, 30 minutes max, we will die of hypothermia. And everyone else on the boat did die, except he swam. So he swam 6 hours in this water,
Mm,
6 kilometers to safety, this island that he lives on, Heimei, which is part of this archipelago off the coast of the main island of Iceland. And he was able to survive this swim because of two things. So this he was a good swimmer, and all of the sort of culture of Iceland is that swimming is part of the mandatory education, and it's baked into the history of this fishing culture where many lives lost at sea, and so everyone learns to swim. And also because he had this biological quirk where his body fat resembled that of a seal, and it was like 2 to 3 times normal human thickness and more solid, and so it was able to keep his body temperature stable, and he could keep swimming for
right,
6 hours and get to shore, and then get to a hospital. And they were not really able to discern his heartbeat, and they didn't like his temperature. They couldn't even read it, and he was
right,
showed no signs of hypothermia, and he was just a little bit dehydrated from his time in the ocean. It was really extraordinary. He became so such a symbol of like Icelandic survival resilience for a
yeah,
people who always prided themselves in this. And also, when they were sort of like on top of the boat, he and his friends said, like, if someone survives, someone needs to tell what happened. And so most of the time he said, like, when something like this happens, no one survives to tell, but I did. And so what happened
mm,
was they were unable to deploy the uh, the the survival raft, the life raft, because it was stuck, and they weren't able to automatically deploy it because that was something that they hadn't installed yet. So he wanted
right,
to advocate for these sort of like automatically deploying lifeboats, and to be in all of the Icelandic fishing fleet, and that did happen. But over
mm,
time, also he became this really like world known figure for his amazing body physiology, and went through all these tests and was written up in these medical journals. And then, I mean, after a
right,
while, like, he's really like anyone else, he just wanted to live his life, and so he kind of you know tried to do that. And then over every year, though, there's a swim that's done in his honor. It's called Goodluckson. It's Good Looker's Swim, and it honors
uh-huh,
what he was able to do, and also all of those who died at sea. And so it's kind of this what to me the story is so amazing because I wanted to hear from him, right? So he is notoriously press shy, like I said. Like, there have been movies made about him, books written about
right,
him, and all, but um, he doesn't really want a part of that. And so I guess I really struggled with trying to figure out as a journalist, like, how I could respectfully approach him and ask him, I want to hear your story. I want to know what
right,
swimming means to you, as someone who both experienced so much tragedy, but also was able to survive because of it. And
right, right.
so I did that.
How'd you break him down? Like, just, uh, yeah, how did you? Because that's a journalist's greatest challenge is to get people to talk. What, just persistence, or did he realize you were a swimmer, and did that kind of warm his well insulated heart? What?
I wrote him a letter, and then Google translated it into Icelandic, and then I mailed him 2 copies of the letter. over the Atlantic Ocean, and then sent me my email
Uh,
address. And and then he wrote back to me and he said, "Thank you for your letter, but no, thank you. I don't want to talk to you."
right. And he
And
scowled
so
probably in just the way he scowled in that picture too.
right, he probably did, and I picture that in my mind.
Yeah.
But then we wrote to each other. We became pen pals, and I wrote to him for a year before we actually met in person.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
really,
Amazing.
yeah, it's very special that he said yes.
Yeah, incredible. So sometimes circumstance, here's this man pitched in the ocean, 41 degrees, and he becomes this national, and really, I'm sure through your book will become even more of it, like an international figure, his story. And you have a friend closer to home, Kim Chambers, who also by, and even, I don't know if it's an odder, but an even crazier circumstance, she ends up becoming a distance swimmer. Tell us what happened to Kim and what turned Kim into this crazy, also ultra distance swimmer.
So when I started toying around with the idea of writing a book about swimming, my friend, journalist Adam Skolnick, said you have to meet Kim, and uh, and he introduced us. And Kim Chambers is I write about her in I introduced her in the book as like the long distance swimmer or the marathon swimmer who the best swimmer marathon swimmer you don't know, right? So
Right.
but she's certainly become more known since then, and she was the first woman to swim from the Farallon Islands solo to San Francisco, and so that's 30 miles
Oh my God.
in the open ocean, red triangle of sharks,
So
and
wait, let's
she
pause on that for just a second though. Red triangle, just let's not go past that too quick. When you say red triangle, we're talking about is it the breeding ground or it's just a feeding ground of white sharks?
Yeah. So around the Farallons, they tend to congregate because there are many seals there, sea lions and other life too. Oh wait, but that's me in the Faroe Islands. Yeah, that's not the Farallons.
It's water though. It is water.
I would not be swimming out there. That I'm not Kim
Yeah.
Chambers.
Yeah.
But she, did the swim, and it's open ocean. I mean, think about the most rugged, many thousands of feet deep, and again, like there are a lot of sharks that feed out there, great white sharks, and that's known.
Yeah.
There was a shark
Yeah.
researchers out there for a long time, and so, but she only became the extraordinary thing about her story is that she only became a distance swimmer after she almost lost her leg due to amputation after an accident, and so she uh, was rehabbing and recovering for 2 years. She was relearning how to walk, and then took up swimming as
Right.
part of therapy,
Right.
and started swimming in with the Dolphin Club and South End Rowing Club in Aquatic Park. And she found that the cold water was stimulating the nerves in her leg, and she was asking her doctors,
Mm.
isn't it possible that like the cold water is actually because I have more feeling in my leg, I feel that I am just like it's healthier, it's doing better because of that. And so after I heard the story, I immediately went to 5 miles to UCSF, where some of the premier researchers in
Right.
cold water, brown fat, white fat, like what happens to our bodies um, uh, in cold water. They were able to tell me some, the researchers there about like what all the things that do happen. I learned about that we have two kinds of fat. Who knew? Brown fat and white fat. I didn't know that.
Right.
Most of us know about white fat. It's our sort of body's energy storage, and brown fat is also a kind of fat that we're born with. That it has these cells have a lot of mitochondria, so they create heat energy, and so even though we're born with a certain amount and it starts to decrease as we age, there's a process called the browning of white fat into what's called beige fat. That you can do with like that happens in our bodies after cold exposure, exercise, other factors. And so it was like this very interesting, you know, again, science starting to catch up with some of these things we've sort of wondered about, like what do some bodies do better in cold water, right? Because you look around and you're sort of like you see
Yeah.
that some people seem better suited to it. And so I asked him, and she said, "Well, I heard about brown fat," and so that's sort of sent me down that rabbit hole. And it was just such a fun uh,
Yeah.
experience.
She's a Kiwi. She's a New Zealander,
He's a
right?
Kiwi, yeah.
Originally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she just sounds like an amazing spirit. And I believe her into this crazy leg injury, she like caught a high heel or something and fell down a set of stairs, right? So
Right in her,
it was
yeah, the front stairs are
in her own home. So totally a freak accident turned her
great,
into
yeah.
this amazing distance swimmer. Well, I think now since we're talking about like incredible endurance swimming, it would be a good time to introduce our other guest tonight, and that's Lynne Cox. Lynne is just the distance open water swimmer, probably the greatest in history. She swam in every cold water location you can think of: the Bering Sea, Antarctica, Greenland. And Lynne's going to join us now and read, I believe, a little excerpt of one of her favorite parts of Bonnie's book. So, Lynne, come on in.
Hi, Jim.
There you
Hi,
are.
Bonnie. Great to see you.
Hey,
Hi,
great to
Lynne.
see you too. Why don't you go ahead and read us your portion, or tell us why you chose this portion to read?
I think that swimmers in the open water feel this huge connection to the water because it's soothing and it helps them reduce their stress and it gets them into a different mindset. And so when I was reading Bonnie's book, I came across this passage about meditation. And I thought, this is exactly what I'm feeling when I'm swimming. And I think what a lot of my friends are feeling too. And I thought it was just so beautifully written. Submersion creates internal quiet too. Sometimes swimming to blankness is the goal. We enter the meditative state induced by counting laps and observe the subtle play of light as the sun moves across the lanes. We slip from thought to thought, and then there's a momentary nothingness. In that brief interlude, we are entirely liberated from the weight of thinking. And I just thought this was just so amazing because it describes what I do for hours when I'm out there training to do a big swim or I'm on a swim. And you're just in that state of moving and letting your mind float like your body.
Yeah. Is that the ultimate? For you, Lynne, do you feel like getting to that mind space is almost as important as the swimming itself?
Yes, I think that that's what really draws me in because it allows me to relax my mind and work my body. And also, it gives me time to just think about what I'm doing with my life and what I'm writing about and how I'm creating. And I think that this balance, this movement and motion and pace that we do helps us get into that meditative state that releases us from the stress of every day. And I think that, especially now when the world is a little bit stranger than normal, I think that being able to go into the water and swim helps me and a lot of my friends just clear their minds and relax and feel happy.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Bonnie? How often would you say in a swim, how common or how rare is it to get to that state where you're just sort of in the zone? Or there are two different terms you use in your book. One is in the zone, and what's the other? There are two kind of
Oh,
factors.
a state of flow, right?
State
And
of
so,
flow, and this sounds more like flow than being in the zone, but maybe explain those two and what they are and how often you feel like you get there when you're swimming.
I mean, I think the zone is very much about competition, right? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
this focused, slowed down, like tunnel vision that people talk about when they're
Mm-hmm.
so focused on like a race or a game or something. And I think what Lynn talks about and what I talked to her about for the book that I just loved hearing her um, uh, describe to me was this, the state of flow where you're so immersed in that, again, that psychological state that is, we are so immersed in the activity that we are doing that, we lose track of time. It's not about like it's slowing down. It's that we don't really notice it passing anymore. And then we are just in a place that's sort of out of time. And you know, Lynn, I remember you saying that like when you are swimming out there, sometimes you can smell the coffee off the pier, or that you know, you just see the fish kind of silvery below you, and there, it's almost like you become part of that water. You become part of, and I think one of the things that I think is so special about swimming is that you are in a medium that you're not normally in, right? So
Mm,
you're not, we're, you know, we're normally on land walking around in air, and then at the second you get into that water, the second you plunge in, it's this, you have the feeling of the water all over your body, and you have to breathe in a certain way, and you are attentive to that. And then if you kind of go long enough, you can achieve this state of, it's a shift in perspective. It's again something that, as Lynn said, we need so much right now, so desperately, to feel
yeah.
that we are able to then also like check in with ourselves. I think about swimming as a, a mental break, but also this time to really spend with your, in this deep strangeness of your own mind. And I think that even before pandemic times, that was very valuable because we don't really have that. And now I think having that, again, that sort of, it's a sort of enforced isolation, can be so beneficial, um, now, you know, to be able to see where we're feeling, but also to be outside of ourselves. If, I think open water does that in a way that's different from being in a pool. And so I actually found myself, you know, pushing myself to spend more time in open water, by
Yeah.
necessity, but also being able to access a lot of the things that Lynn talks about, when she's drifting, you know, out there. I just
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, I definitely very much felt that. In fact, before the pools reopened, now we were all, a lot of us from here inland in Pasadena were headed down to uh, the beach and to swimming down there. And once the pool reopened, I'm back in the pool, but I really feel like there's just something really special about what Lynn does. In fact, Lynn, do you do pool swims at all, or is it all open water and ocean swimming for you?
Well, right now it's just open water, bay swimming,
Yeah.
but when I'm traveling a lot, I wind up swimming a lot in hotel pools. And that is just really hard because you keep flip turning many times.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that one of the things that is so conducive to letting your mind float and your body too is having the ability to swim as long as you want and then turn around and not have to
Mhm.
keep track of how far you swum or how many laps you've done. You've just gone for a distant swim and enjoyed being in that moment as the moments progress, as you go through the workout or through just the time that you're spending out there that day.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Hey, Lynn, I want you to tell one quick story because I wrote a story about a channel swimmer, Catalina channel swimmer, a few years back. And I recounted the whole history of channel swimming, and some of the great chapters in the Catalina channel were written by you. I believe you had at one point the record for the fastest crossing, or correct me if I'm wrong on that. But also, what I really want you to talk about is the very first time you got in to do that swim, which for people who don't know, and Lynn can describe this better, they normally put you in the middle of the night because the water's supposed to be calmer and flatter at that point. And something went wrong, right, on your first channel swim?
Actually, my first channel swim was when Catalina channel was when I was 14. And then
Okay.
I did it again when I was 17. And my goal was to break the record to swim
Okay.
from the island to the mainland. And so during that swim, I got about 10 miles across the channel and the fog came in. And
Mm,
I got separated from the lead boat. There was a couple lifeguards that were paddling or rowing a dory for me. And then there was a coach on a paddleboard. And the dory got lost in the fog. And suddenly the paddler and I were in the middle of Catalina Channel at midnight and we couldn't see anything. And there were ships starting to move around us and we could feel the
oh my
waves of the
God.
ships bouncing off the bows. And it was terrifying. And about, I think, 4 or 5 hours into that swim, I just disqualified myself. If you touch anyone or anything during the swim, you're disqualified. So I
Right.
touched the coach's board, and about 45 minutes later, the crew finally found us. And at
Oh,
that point, I decided I never want to do a channel swim again. This just is not fun. It's just not worth it. But
right.
a good friend of mine was a man named Fami Atala, and he had tried to swim the English Channel 6 times, and he was a psychologist, and he never made the English Channel, but he helped me when I trained to swim the English Channel. And he told me that, you really need to go back and swim Catalina because it will bother you all of your life if you don't do it. So
Wow.
I went back and
Wow.
I broke the record from the mainland to the island, and my brother held the record from the island to the mainland. So it
Wow.
was kind of a wonderful thing to have that for a few years.
That's amazing. And anyone
Back in there,
has it,
we convinced you.
so it
Yeah,
all could
and
have ended at 17, and you got in many decades beyond that in some of the most amazing. It really changed your life. The fact that he got you back in the water, right?
absolutely. And then there was a reporter for the LA Times named Lynne Ross who wrote this amazing story about that swim because she had come along on the swim and watched the
Mhm.
whole dynamics the first time and then saw me succeed the second time. And
Wow.
it was fantastic to be able to accomplish that and then realize that there were swims out there that nobody in the world had ever done. And I just was attracted to trying new things.
That's an understatement, I would say. Trying new things, all the amazing swims that you've done. I got to say, just a brief highlight of my own. When I accompanied a young doctor named Peter Attia doing his Catalina Channel crossing. Typically, as Lynne could tell you, people start on the Catalina side and swim towards Palos Verdes, 20 miles. It's thought the current helps you a little bit that way. And Peter Attia got in the middle of the night, just like Lynne's describing, and I was going to swim with him part of the way, but only a couple miles. And I got in the next morning at about 6 a.m., perfect glassy water. And about 30 seconds after I got in, at first it was kind of terrifying, as these two could attest, because a pod of dolphins, big dolphins, came up right underneath us and swam. It felt like within touching range underneath us, and then swam with us for the next 15 or 20 minutes, sort of darting in and out between us. And
Yeah,
it was a life. It was definitely a swimming highlight, but it was a life highlight just because the sun was coming up. There were dolphins swimming with us, and yeah, I think we've all had those. Bonnie, what's your most kind of greatest epiphany moment swimming, or give us your greatest one of your greatest hits?
that is a hell of a question, Jim.
Sorry.
Well, your dolphin story did remind me of just like the strange uh, reminder when we're out there that we are not the
Right.
apex anything out there, and I was actually out surfing at Ocean Beach this past year, and one of the greatest memories, like really one of the greatest experiences I've had in the ocean, was I was sitting on my surfboard, and this had never happened to me before. I've seen plenty of dolphins, and they've swum up, and they've surfed underneath me, and they're just such natural, joyous surfers and swimmers. But this dolphin came right up to me, and then went, stuck its head up, and I said, clicked at me, and I was so shocked that I
Wow.
said, "Hello." Just was so, I think just so stunned and so just taken out of my, again, normal state of being. Like, just, I love being out there because I have the shift in perspective that I would not have otherwise. And um,
Right.
the momentary interspecies connection
Yeah.
felt very profound to me. I just didn't, had never had that before. And
Yeah.
it just reminds me, when we're out there, that we can experience those things, and that we are such a tiny, tiny speck in the world, and that we are all connected. The water connects us in this way that's very profound. And
Right.
I did have a question for Lynn, because we've talked so much about open water swimmer and then kind of managing fear and just how kind of confronting fear when swimming in open water is like it is a constantly renewing state of being, and I wondered how you've thought about it over the course of your lifelong relationship with swimming. Like, so you talked about how you were terrified during that channel swim when you were separated, but yet how have you managed the fear and the risk, swim to swim to this day? Like, how do you think about that?
I think that so much of what I do takes years to plan. And so I try to minimize the risks before I even do them. So, for instance, I knew I was going to do a swim around the Cape of Good Hope or try to be the first person to swim around the Cape of Good Hope. And so I knew there were great white sharks and other sharks there and that they were might be a problem. So initially I thought of using a shark cage, but the problem with a shark cage is you get dragged by it or you can get beaten up by it if waves hit it. So I thought some more about it and talked to locals and was able to meet up with the Cape Town Special Forces team, basically, who worked with the police department. And they offered to come along with me on the swim and be spotters for me so that they would take turns jumping in the water, being towed by a rope beside me, and holding a shark gun in their hands. And they were probably 5 meters away at the most. So it was perfect to have that kind of protection. And actually, during that swim, I needed it. There was a 10-foot bronze whaler shark that came up out of the kelp for me. And the diver had to shoot it because its mouth was open and it was going to bite. And the diver, Doug, shot it in the dorsal fin, and the shark just turned and bit the spear and pulled it out of its fin and swam off. So
Wow.
I didn't find out about this until the end of the swim. And I asked Doug, well, was the shark okay? And he said, yes, it will heal. That's why I shot it in the dorsal fin. But there was much blood in the water so that it had been attracting other sharks. So that's why the crew was telling me to sprint towards shore. And I really already knew that was what I needed to
Go
do.
faster! Go faster!
Exactly. Didn't
Oh my
need
gosh.
anyone to tell me that.
Wow. Because normally for you, Lynn, is more of the challenge just the cold, or is that just for us mere mortals that we worry so much about the cold? Are you beyond that now, even when you swim in a place like Greenland or the Bering Sea?
The cold is a huge challenge, and part of that has been to be able to be a research subject for Dr. Keating at the University of London. He was doing research on hypothermia and how to get people to survive or rewarm better. So I became, for many years, a test subject. But for me, the swims are far more than just, can I challenge the cold? It's more like, can I do that? And it's this huge puzzle that I have to figure out. But I think also a lot of my swims have been about opening borders. The swim that I did across the Bering Strait was to try to bridge the distance between the United States and Soviet Union in
Wow.
1987. And that took 11 years to finally get approval, but Gorbachev granted approval and the swim actually did that. So I think that initially my swims were about breaking world records. Then it became trying to do something that no one had ever done. And then there became something more important in that. And that's sort of where I've gone with the different swims.
Yeah.
The connection.
Wow. There's a great line in the book that I wanted to read, and it goes back to the Baghdad Swim Club. It's one of the swimmers' name. I believe it's Andre. Is that how we pronounce it?
Andre.
Andre. Spelled a little unusually, but what he said about swimming that I loved was he said, it's like reading books. When you're in it, you're not in the world outside. And I thought maybe that's why this was such a perfect thing for the book club, because we're talking about not only people who love to get absorbed in books, but I assume a lot of our people who are listening and watching tonight are also people who get absorbed in swimming. And so I just wonder for you, like Bonnie, can you compare those two kinds of absorption, the absorption of swimming and the absorption of reading? Is there any comparison, or are they just like,
No, yeah, I so remember him saying that and being so struck by the
yeah,
um, the the immersion idea, right? So the immersion in a story and being taken away and being so really so swept away that you forget yourself, that you are um, somewhere else. And so this again harkens back to what we talked about earlier, where when we swim far enough, long enough, that we are in a different place. We're a different place in our minds, and we, um, sometimes depending on where we're at, where our brains are at, that we will notice and be very acutely present, but
yeah,
also that we will be in the darkest recesses of our minds, like where that we haven't thought about memories or ideas or people, who we haven't thought about them in years, and they come up, and it's like this again. It's the fluidity, it's the quality of being in water that I think enables this to happen. And so I think absolutely, with reading and swimming and writing, like all of those things are so tied together for me, and especially in the flow section of the book, that um, it's this exploration of uh, poetry and stories and literature and all of these. I had to turn to the poets, right? Like I wanted to turn to the scientists to talk about the flow state, and I did, and the psychologists and the psychiatrists and all this. But that it was really when I turned to the poets, that I could get the sensory experience, the magic, communicated. And so I think that
yeah,
all of those things for me are so tied together.
yeah, yeah. That's beautifully said. And for Lynn, for you, the swimming came first, and then you eventually started writing about it. So, is there? Do you find absorption in writing as well as you do in swimming, or is it just slave labor like it is for me?
It depends on what I'm writing, whether it
Uh
flows
huh.
or it's a challenge. But I think that so many of my good ideas occur when I'm out there swimming. I think that being able to be in your sort of own think tank and let the ideas come and go and try them out, it really is helpful so that by the time I finish an hour or 2 hour workout, I can just get out of the water, take a shower, and sit in front of the computer and just start writing. And I think
Yeah.
that maybe it's because you're also moving and oxygenating your brain, and then you come back to a point where you can just relax and write. I think it is a place for me where I'm able to immerse myself in the water and then immerse myself with the writing.
Nice. Okay. Well, maybe just as a last question to both of you, then, and Lynn, you can go first. What is your next project, both writing or in your professional life, and then swimming, and maybe the two go together?
The two will always go together, I think, actually.
Right.
But
Right.
I've just finished a new book that's Knopf's going to be publishing, and it'll probably be another year before it goes through all the editing process. We're not yet sure what the title is going to be, but we're working on it. And as far as swimming goes, I'm swimming in Alamitos Bay in Long Beach pretty much every day, and just enjoying that I can have that and feel so sorry for my swimming friends that aren't able to be out there swimming.
Nice. Beautiful. And so how far do you go? What's a normal day swim for you,
A normal day is anywhere from a 1 to 3 hour swim, just depending on what I'm doing in my life. And I
Lynn? Okay.
used to just swim in the morning, but now I'm mixing it up so that it's been really interesting. In the last week, the water temperature was about 70 degrees and it suddenly dropped to 64. And
Yep,
I don't
it sure did.
it's so weird. I don't remember any July where the water was so chilly, but
Yeah. No,
but it's still refreshing and it's great.
that's awesome. And what about you, Bonnie? What are you doing both in your writing life and in your swimming life? What are you aspiring to?
Um, we are wrapping up the edits and finalizing the art for my first children's book, which is coming
Yeah.
Oh
out.
wow.
I'm so excited. It's called Sarah and the Big Wave, and it's about the first woman to surf Mavericks, Sarah Gerhardt, and it's about the day she meets her first big wave. And I am so excited. I've always wanted to do a children's book. I mean, since I was a child myself, and now that I have two little kids, I'm just so pleased to have the opportunity to do that. And swims, I'm really enjoying this strangely enough, I am enjoying this strange time in that it is different from my normal routine. I think sometimes I don't know what I'll be doing each day in terms of how I'll get in the water and what the conditions will bring. One of the things I realized is that, normally I will swim probably several days a week in a pool, and then the rest of the time surfing or open water swimming as the conditions allow. And what I realize now in this pandemic time is that I have no say in it. It just depends on what
Right.
nature is doing. Is there some howling wind situation coming in? Is there some storm where there's going to be some nasty runoff that I need to avoid? So it just depends, and I'm not in control. And I think that's an interesting and necessary life lesson that I have started to roll with, which is, it's not up to me, and I,
Yeah.
sort of adapt to it and kind of go with it. And I think to have occasionally a pool swim where someone, a friend has said, hey, we have a backyard pool that is, this long. You can kind of do that, and to be
Right.
so happy to like get in there and feel, that some semblance of normalcy, or that there's, the local community pool opening up, and having a friend gift me her lane reservation is, and,
Right.
that's meaningful to me. Like, I didn't plan for that, but that it happened, and that I'm usually a very type A. I plan very far ahead, and I'm learning to be more okay with not being in control, because we're not really. And
Yeah.
swimming and teaches me that.
Yeah. Lovely. Okay. Well, I know we've got a ton of questions piling up from all of you out there. And so I'm going to have Donna Wares come back in and get to some questions from our audience. So, Donna, please join us. There you are.
Hi there. Well, I just want to say thank you, Jim, Bonnie, and Lynn, for that wonderful conversation. It was just terrific. We do have a few reader questions. Our first question is for Lynn. Lynn, what do you think about while swimming long distances? Do you sing to yourself, have conversations, mentally write a chapter for your next book? You kind of touched on this a little bit about writing your book, but I'm just curious about the other parts of our reader question here from Hank.
I think a lot of the time I'm just thinking about what's going on around me and watching. Just the other day I was swimming offshore and there was this huge bat ray that just started swimming underneath me. So I followed him because I don't get to see bat rays very often. And then I continued swimming and there was a cormorant that popped up near me. So part of my reason for swimming out in the open water is just to be out there in nature. But I also do sing to myself and write chapters of my book and think about what I'm doing in my life. And I think it's one of those places where you can be on your own and just think. And in a world that seems sometimes so crazy and noisy, the water helps to quiet everything.
Great, thank you. So this question comes for Bonnie. It's from a reader named Susan on Facebook, and she would like to know, what is your mental and physical strategies do you use not to panic in cold water?
That is a great question, Susan. Breathe. I think breathing and your rhythm of breathing has so much to do with your state of calm or relaxation. And so I remember actually my first real experience with swimming in very, very cold water, and feeling like this tightness in my chest, right? So even though I was wearing a wetsuit at the time, just to feel the wetsuit compression, and then it affected how I swam and how I breathed. I was breathing, and that was a feedback loop, right? So that was sort of supporting the anxiety that was and the stress. And so to just really calm down, slow down, and to recognize that it is I think what Lynn was saying about preparation and knowledge is so critical to managing that anxiety and that stress, for sure, especially around cold water, and understanding your limits and starting slow.
Our next question, a reader would like to know, this one's for Bonnie. Would you consider swimming the Molokai Channel?
No.
Okay.
I will leave that to more accomplished and wonderful swimmers like Lynne Cox and Kim Chambers and Antonio Anguias. I know. I love hearing stories, and part of the reason I wrote this book is that I could hear these stories, right, from swimmers who would do these things and want to do these things and feel very much called to do them, and because I don't. I want to be super honest. Like, that's not my thing.
Great. Our next question is for both Bonnie and Lynn. So we'll start with Bonnie, and then Lynn can jump in here. How does your breathing practice for long distance swimming differ or compare to that of free diving swimming techniques? Any thoughts on that topic?
I mean, I know just a little bit about free diving, breath hold stuff from friends like Adam Skolnick and James Nestor, who have written very extensively on the topic. And I don't really think it compares, other than in terms of the knowledge, what I take away from breath hold techniques and practice with surfing is that you always have more air than you think or feel that you do. And so that in itself is a completely calming, it helps me to know that. And so with surfing, sometimes you'll be held down by a set of waves, and you just kind of relax. Again, it kind of goes back to the other question about breathing techniques and how that sort of how you relax in cold water. But for me, at least, that's sort of the extent of it, is that knowing that you have much more air than you feel you do, and to always stay relaxed, because when you tense up is when you start expelling air, and I think Lynn will be able to say much more about this.
Okay, Lynn?
I think that diving and swimming are really different sports. And so for me, I breathe every 3 to 5 strokes when I'm swimming so that I can swim in a straight line and also be aware of what's on either side of me. But as far as doing deep diving and breathing techniques, I don't do that unless I'm going out through very heavy surf. And then I'll have to, as Bonnie said, know how to hold my breath and know when I can get up out of the wave.
Right. I think free diving is about how much you hold your breath, and swimming is more about the rhythm of your breathing and the pacing, and that is what sort of you're focused on when you're doing the long distance swimming.
There was a documentary that Keith Malloy did called Fish People, and he profiled 6 different people in it. One was a diver who was able to hold her breath for, I think, 5 or 6 minutes. And the documentary was very well done and talked about the difference between, and I was included in the documentary, but the description of her ability to swim for long times underwater is so different than swimming on the surface of the water. And it's such a different sport, but one that I admire what all the different sports that people can do in the ocean. And I feel like I'm just fortunate that I found something that I can do something well.
And we have another reader question, and this one is for Lynn. What is your favorite food to eat during a swim? Do you have one?
Actually, oatmeal raisin cookies, because they stay with me for a long time and they taste good. And I thought that, they gave me energy. And actually, my roommate in college was a woman named Sandy Nielsen, who won the gold medal in the 100-meter freestyle. At the time, I was swimming in this channel. And I remember asking her, "Hey, Sandy, what did you eat before you swam in the Olympics?" And she said, "Oatmeal with raisins." So it's something that I think works for both sprinters and endurance swimmers, but it's also still a special treat.
And this same reader named Kelson wanted to know, and you talked about this a little bit earlier in the conversation, but Lynn, any special animal encounters that you've had during a swim?
Actually, I think one of the most unusual encounters I ever had was when I was swimming to Antarctica, and there were a group of penguins that were coming down the cliffs that were just all covered with ice and snow, and suddenly they dove off the glaciers into the water and swam underneath my support boat and me. And I'd never seen penguins swim before. And it was extraordinary because the water was so clear and you could see small bubbles just coming out of their beaks. And they dolphined through the water like dolphins, and they stayed one after the other in line. And I just thought, this is the most amazing thing I have ever seen during a swim. Just you don't expect these things. And that's why you do them too, because you, just like Jim had talked about earlier, suddenly having dolphins coming along and swimming with him and Bonnie as well. It makes those moments that we spend out there in the water even more significant than they are, I think.
So, in this crazy time, I know both of you haven't been out there talking about books or about your work as you normally would do, and you've been doing most of your work here on Zoom. Lynn, you mentioned some interesting Zoom conversations you've had with readers of people reaching out when we spoke earlier today, and I wonder if you could just share just a little bit about. How those conversations have been going with readers out there in the world and swimmers out there in the world.
Actually, it's been really fun because there have been different groups in different parts of the world that have selected different my different books to read. And so there was a group from Israel, about 120 swimmers, that read Swimming to Antarctica. And that became the connection for all of them to talk about the book. But then that was a jump off point to talk about their love for swimming, and they're swimming in the Sea of Galilee. And suddenly, through this conversation, I was finding out about where they trained, what they did, and how they were dealing with these huge changes in life. And then I talked to a group of swimmers in Virginia, no, Charleston. There was a whole swim team that read Grayson. So there were 40 young swimmers that were just beginning to do, some of them were just starting to do open water swimming. And so they were scared and they were excited and they were telling me about some of the challenges they faced. And then they told me that, one of the things they had to worry about when they swam around Charleston in the river were alligators. And I thought, wow, I've never had to do that before, and I'm not sure I'd want to do that either. So it's been really fun to do these book tours by Zoom and meet people all over the place as we're doing tonight. It's been really extraordinarily fun.
Well, and Bonnie, I saw you talking on Twitter about having the unusual experience of releasing a big new book that people are reading and talking about, but never actually seeing it in a bookstore. Can you talk a little bit how you've been having to do all of this from home? How has your book tour been going? Any memorable things to share?
I mean, it's at once extremely weird, right? Like to actually see your book in a bookstore is one of the signal moments of when your book comes out. And I only really thought about it when a friend sent me a photo of the book in her local bookstore window, and I just thought, oh, I haven't seen that. Like I haven't had the pleasure of experiencing that. And then, but also I think what the silver lining is that it has had such, there's no geographic limitation to say an event like this, right? So this is the LA Times book club, but that so many people anywhere could be experiencing this and to be participating in this with us. I think that is a silver lining, and I've gotten just I think just the most wonderful letters. I think people have had time to engage with the book and think about what swimming means to them, and uh, to have a moment to reflect about it and to want to reach out and have a minute in their busy lives, what maybe they wouldn't normally have done that, to write to me, and I hold all of those letters so dear to me. One thing that of course certainly couldn't have expected in pandemic times, well, just pandemic times, but also a book in pandemic times, is that people have told me that they've read the book and cried, and also not wanted to read it until they got back in the water. And so that was also like a really interesting, just the basic fact that this book came out in a time when many people couldn't swim, and so they've sort of since found ways to do that. But that is so heartbreaking and also profound that people have told me that this is what swimming means to them. This is what they have realized in the time of drought and deprivation, that reading about it can be a balm for some people. Some people it's just they had to wait, but that they were so moved to write to me. I just find that so. I mean, that's a connection that any writer who puts some work, a piece of writing out into the void wants, right? So that's that connection. So I deeply, deeply appreciate all of the notes that come my way.
So normally we do live book events, and we always rotate around to different booksellers in Southern California and have independent booksellers participate. And so now that we've moved to virtual events, we have a virtual version of that. So tonight's partners bookstore is Skylight Books, and they have copies of Why We Swim available with signed book plates for our book club event. So if anyone would like to get a copy of the book, it's available there. And when Skylight Books heard that Lynne Cox was joining us tonight, they included her books on that same bookstore link as well. So Skylight Books,
Thank you.
they're all there, all of our books. I'd also like to invite all of our viewers tonight to sign up for the LA Times Book Club newsletter, so you can stay in the loop about our upcoming events. We share our newsletter, we share our book stories, and this way you'll always know who our next authors are. And speaking of our next authors, just a quick preview, our August book selection is The Vanishing Half. It's Britt Bennett's it's really it's an amazing best-selling novel about the story of two twins and family secrets. That's #1 on the LA Times bestseller list right now, and has also just been optioned for an HBO series. So we'll be talking more.
I loved it. It's so good. So please read it.
Great. We'll be talking more about that in the weeks ahead. So just a little preview. And as we wrap up, I wanted to throw out a final question to all three of our guests. What are some of your favorite stories about the water? What other book, aside from our two amazing authors here, what other books about the either swimming or surfing really resonate with you that you really would like to share with others? I'll start with Jim. Do you have a book suggestion for our readers?
Yeah, this is one I know. I've talked to Bonnie about this, that she loves too. Barbarian Days, William Finnegan, the amazing New Yorker writer, writes about his life as a surfer, and it's a travel log. It does a lot of the things beautifully that Bonnie's book does. It takes you around the world. It really makes you feel what it feels like to be in the ocean. And a bonus for those of us who read the LA Times is that William Finnegan's younger brother, Michael Finnegan, is a crackerjack political writer for the LA Times. So Barbarian Days, amazing read for those who love the ocean and who love surfing. Or even if you don't, it's so well done, you'll really enjoy it anyway.
Great. Lynne, how about you? Do you have a book to suggest?
Yeah, there's a book by Lynn Sure that celebrates swimming, and it's just called Swim. And it's a perfect summer read. It's a little book, and it describes all the history of swimming and the fun, and even explaining how the Egyptians had a character for swimming. I just really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And Bonnie is our book club author. You get the last word tonight. Tell us, what book would you suggest?
Well, I loved both Barbarian Days and Swim, but my suggestion is Swimming Studies by Leanne Shapton. It is just a beautiful exploration of her former life as a competitive swimmer for Canada. And Leanne is, I like to think of her as a Renaissance woman. She is a writer, illustrator, and just a just incredibly creative, talented person. And her book is just this beautiful exploration of not only her personal relationship with swimming and what it was like to be an elite competitor for a very formative period of her life, but also what it's like to let that go and kind of learn to understand and appreciate swimming in all these other ways. So, swimming studies.
Well, thank you all for just a wonderful conversation. You know, and I feel like we only scratched the surface of Bonnie's book. There is so much in the book that it was
Oh,
one of those books that you started reading, and I actually felt like it got better as it went along because you just kept being surprised around every corner. So, thank you so much for sharing it, Bonnie. Thank you, Lynn, for joining us. And thank you, Jim. What a pleasure. I haven't gotten to see Jim in a while. We're all working at home now. So I want to thank our guests and I want to thank all of our readers for joining us and say good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Right, thank you.